In the previous lesson, we learned about what political parties are and what they do. In course number 13, we also discussed the proportional representation system and what it means for the seats that your elected representatives occupy in the national and the provincial legislatures. But what happens when no party wins an outright majority? In other words, what happens when no single party wins the required 50% of the seats plus one seat in Parliament to form a government? In this case, political parties can come together to form coalition governments. This sounds a bit like Game of Thrones, doesn't it? Actually, it really isn't. But let's break it down. Coalition governments are governments in which multiple political parties or independent candidates can come together to achieve a parliamentary majority, form a government, and work together towards a common goal. There is a common perception that politicians with different ideologies and standpoints cannot possibly work together towards a common goal. But this is far from the truth. Coalition governments are actually a sign of a thriving and mature democracy, and the PR system in South Africa is very well suited to the formation of coalition governments. South Africa's system makes it possible for political parties to come together and unite to form a government at any of the three spheres of government. That is, at national, provincial, and local level. For more information on the three spheres of government and how they function, head back to course number 6. The South African electoral system has a minimum level of support that is required for political parties and independent candidates to win a seat, either in the National Assembly, provincial legislature, or in local councils. As we discussed in course number 12, this minimum level of support is determined by the IEC seat threshold. This is important to remember because while 50% of the seats plus one seat is what political parties in Parliament need to form a government, they first need to win a certain proportion of the national vote in order to win any seats in the first place. In course 12, we discussed how the IEC sets thresholds, which determine how many seats a certain percentage of the votes amounts to. We also learned that in a PR system like ours, when there are leftover votes which don't meet the threshold required to secure a parliamentary seat, these votes are redistributed between the parties on the ballot using the remainder system. This really matters because it is the parliamentary seat count which determines whether a political party can form a government. But what goes into forming a coalition government? And what are the different types of agreements that make coalition governments work? When the final election results are declared by the IEC, and if it becomes clear that no single political party has won enough votes in the election to secure an outright majority of seats in Parliament or in a provincial legislature, political parties will immediately begin negotiating with each other to form a coalition government. When political parties come together for these negotiations, they discuss matters that will be the guiding frameworks for what is known as a coalition agreement. These include matters such as their priorities for their term in government, including which policies they agree on and which will require further negotiation, which laws and budgets they will work together to pass and based on what conditions, what protocols they will use to make decisions within the coalition, which candidate or candidates they will nominate and elect as Speaker, President, or Premier, and how government leadership positions will be allocated and distributed between them. Political parties have 14 days from the time that the election results are declared by the IEC to form a government, whether it is a coalition or otherwise. While there aren't any set laws or guidelines for forming coalition governments or for how they should function, it is in the best interest of political parties to make sure that negotiations don't go on for too long. There are other ways in which political parties can cooperate with one another following an election in which there is no outright majority in Parliament. Bigger political parties can enter into confidence and supply agreements with smaller political parties. These kinds of agreements basically ensure the support of the smaller parties in the arrangement on crucial votes in exchange for policy or other kinds of concessions and compromises from the bigger party. In such an agreement, the smaller political parties may choose not to occupy any government leadership positions in order to maintain their independence. The most important aspect of coalitions is the political necessity of compromise and cooperation. When these are not present, the functioning of the coalition can become difficult and may even become dysfunctional. We will talk more about why compromise and cooperation are so important in the following lessons.